What does a civilization hear when it finally becomes quiet enough to listen to the universe? Not the comforting hush of emptiness, but something stranger. A silence so wide, so old, and so patient that it begins to feel like a presence of its own. We lift our instruments into the dark, tune our antennas toward the stars, and wait for a voice that may never come. Yet the waiting has changed us. It has made poets out of engineers, philosophers out of astronomers, and careful witnesses out of anyone willing to look up long enough. For generations, the night sky seemed simple from a distance, a scattered field of lights, fixed, serene, almost intimate. But every century has made that picture less certain. Telescopes revealed motion where there appeared to be stillness. Radio dishes uncovered whispers hidden inside static. Spacecraft showed us that even our own cosmic neighborhood is less orderly than we once believed. The heavens did not become less beautiful as they became more mysterious. They became more human. They began to reflect our deepest habits of mind, our longing to understand, our fear of misreading, our instinct to search for meaning even in the faintest signal. This story begins there, in that fragile space between evidence and imagination, not with answers, but with anomalies. A signal that seemed too precise, a star that dimmed without reason, an object that moved as if nudged by an invisible hand. Each case arrived like a knock at the door, in the middle of the night, brief, unsettling, impossible to ignore. And yet the real subject is not merely whether someone else is out there. It is what uncertainty does to us. How quickly wonder becomes theory, how often theory yields to humility, and how the unknown keeps inviting us forward. Perhaps the greatest mystery in the universe is not hidden in the stars at all, but in the restless, hopeful species that cannot stop asking what they mean. What do we call a visitor that appears once, breaks every category we have, and leaves before we can properly introduce ourselves? In the autumn of 2017, astronomers caught sight of something moving through the solar system with the urgency of a thrown stone. It did not circle the sun the way familiar bodies do. It did not belong to the patient family of planets, moons, or ordinary comets. Its path told a different story. This object had come from somewhere beyond our neighborhood, entered briefly, and was already on its way out again. It was given a Hawaiian name, Oumuamua, a messenger arriving from afar before continuing onward. At first, the wonder was simple. Humanity had finally confirmed an interstellar object passing through our system. But wonder soon turned into unease. The visitor seemed oddly elongated, more slender than the asteroids and icy fragments we know. Then came the detail that made scientists lean closer. As it departed, it appeared to accelerate slightly, as though some faint hand had nudged it. Comets can do that when sunlight warms their frozen surfaces and escaping gas acts like thrust. Yet this object showed no obvious tail, no bright cloud, no visible signs of outgassing. That absence created a vacuum, and into that vacuum poured speculation. Some researchers proposed unfamiliar forms of natural matter, strange ices, or unusual shapes produced by conditions we do not yet understand. Others dared to ask whether it might be something artificial, a relic, or fragment of technology wandering between stars. Most scientists remained cautious, and rightly so. The universe has often looked intentional when it was only complex, and perhaps that is why Oumuamua lingers in memory. Not because it proved anything, but because it reminded us how quickly certainty collapses when the unknown arrives unannounced. For a few weeks, we were forced to confront a humbling thought. The cosmos may send us messages that are real and still far beyond our ability to read. Can a star keep a secret simply by changing how it shines? Far from Earth, in the direction of Cygnus, one star began to trouble the clean logic of astronomy. It did not explode. It did not vanish. It simply behaved in a way that felt almost intimate in its strangeness, as though someone were briefly passing a hand across a distant lamp. Its brightness dipped in irregular patterns, sometimes shallow, sometimes dramatic, without the steady rhythm scientists expect when a planet crosses in front of its star. The object became known to the public by a familiar shorthand, Tabby's star. At first, the data looked like a mistake. Instruments fail, measurements drift. Software can mislead, but the dimming remained. More observations followed, and with them came a growing sense that this was no ordinary transit event. Dust was proposed. So were swarms of fragmented comets or clouds of material orbiting in chaotic distributions. Each explanation had some merit, and each seemed to leave something unresolved. The star invited science to do what it does best, resist the seduction of a thrilling answer and keep searching for a truer one. Still, the public imagination raced ahead. If the light was being interrupted by something vast and uneven, what kind of structure could do it? The phrase alien megastructure entered popular conversation not because it was likely, but because it gave shape to a feeling many people already carried, that the universe might contain intelligence expressed on scales we can barely picture. The idea was dramatic, but the deeper story was quieter. Researchers turned radio telescopes toward the star, not to prove a fantasy, but to test the boundary between speculation and evidence. In time, more natural explanations gained strength, especially the role of fine dust affecting different wavelengths of light. Yet the power of the episode never really faded. Tabby's star became a lesson in intellectual discipline, a reminder that mystery is not embarrassment. It is the beginning of method. And maybe that is why the star still glows in the mind long after the headlines have dimmed. Not as proof of hidden builders in the dark, but as an emblem of how knowledge advances, one baffling flicker at a time, with wonder in one hand and restraint in the other. What would it sound like if the universe were trying not to speak, but simply to exist in ways we do not yet understand? In 1977, on a summer night in Ohio, a radio telescope, listening to the sky, recorded something so brief and so startling that it still echoes through scientific memory. The signal rose suddenly out of the background noise, held a peculiar strength, and then disappeared within less than a minute. It never repeated. When astronomer Jerry Eman reviewed the printout days later, he circled the sequence of letters and numbers that marked the event and wrote a single word beside it. Wow! That handwritten reaction became part of the legend. But the real force of the moment lay in its ambiguity. The signal seemed narrow-band, concentrated in a way that caught attention because human technology often produces that kind of focused emission. Natural cosmic sources usually spread their energy more broadly, and yet one signal heard once is not a message. It is a question. Without repetition, without a source precisely pinned down, without a second chance to verify, the event remained suspended between possibility and caution. Over the years, scientists proposed many explanations. Perhaps it was a terrestrial interference that slipped through the filters. Perhaps a rare natural phenomenon passed through the telescope's field of view at exactly the wrong or right moment. Some later hypotheses involved comets or hydrogen clouds, though those ideas did not settle the matter for everyone. What endured was not consensus, but tension. The signal felt meaningful because it arrived in the language of pattern, and human beings are exquisitely vulnerable to pattern. That is why the wow signal became more than a scientific puzzle. It became a mirror. It showed how we respond when mystery appears for just a moment and then withdraws. We replay it. We enlarge it. We place our hope inside its silence. We imagine that if only we had looked a little longer, listened a little better, history might have changed. But perhaps the deeper truth is gentler. Perhaps some of the universe's most important encounters are not answers at all. They are interruptions, brief openings that remind us how vast the dark remains and how ready we are to fill it with our longing. What if the most haunting mysteries are not the ones we see, but the ones we think we hear through the machinery of our own hope? Long before digital culture turned every anomaly into a headline, astronomers were already living with a quieter uncertainty. Radio telescopes, those vast metal ears tilted toward the sky, were built on an almost tender assumption that the universe is not silent, only distant. Night after night, they gathered fragments from space, pulses, bursts, hiss, interference, sorting signal from noise with patience that bordered on faith. And sometimes, within that endless wash of data, something emerged that seemed almost deliberate. There were isolated bursts that arrived without warning, frequencies that stood out from their surroundings, patterns that lingered just long enough to unsettle the people studying them. Most were eventually traced to familiar causes: human satellites, aircraft, reflected transmissions, quirks in instruments, atmospheres, or software. Even pulsars, when first detected, briefly startled scientists because their precision felt too orderly, too intentional, too much like design. The history of listening to space is filled with these moments when the mind rushes ahead of the evidence and then must be gently called back. Yet that does not make the listening any less profound. If anything, it deepens it, because what radio astronomy reveals, again and again, is how narrow the line can be between revelation and projection. We search not only with our devices, but with our imaginations. We build detectors from aluminum and code, but we also build them from desire. We want to know that intelligence is not an accident that happened once on one small world. We want to believe that somewhere, across distances too large for grief or language, another civilization has also looked into the dark and wondered if it was alone. So every unexplained transmission carries two stories at once. One belongs to physics, engineering, and careful elimination. The other belongs to us, to the ancient human habit of leaning toward the unknown as if it might lean back. And maybe that is the real mystery hidden in the static. Not whether the universe has spoken yet, but why we remain so moved by the possibility that one day it might. What if the strangest discoveries are not signals in the sky, but worlds that should not exist, and yet do? For most of human history, planets belonged to philosophy more than evidence. They were possibilities, elegant guesses attached to distant stars. Then, within a single generation, the universe changed shape. Astronomers began finding exoplanets by the thousands. Massive ones grazing their suns, scorched worlds with impossible winds, dim rocky bodies circling red dwarfs, and giant planets drifting through darkness without any star at all. The cosmos, once imagined as orderly and familiar, revealed itself as wildly inventive. Some of these worlds stirred curiosity not because they looked inhabited, but because they stretched our sense of what a planetary system could be. There were planets locked in extreme orbits, worlds dense with metal, and others so puffed up by heat they seemed barely held together by gravity. A few orbited in regions where liquid water might survive, under the right conditions, for long enough to invite chemistry into complexity. Scientists, careful and restrained, spoke in terms of atmospheres, temperatures, biosignatures, and probability. But behind the language of data was a quieter emotional shift. We were no longer asking whether planets existed elsewhere. We were asking what kind of lives the universe might permit. This is where scientific rigor meets a more ancient ache. Every new catalogue of distant worlds becomes, in some sense, a revised map of loneliness. Some planets seem hostile beyond imagination. Others appear almost tender in their possibility, suspended in darkness at just the right distance from a faint star. Yet even there, caution remains essential. A promising world is not a living world. A suitable atmosphere is not a civilization. The farther we look, the more disciplined our hope must become. Still, the discovery of exoplanets altered something permanent in the human spirit. It made the universe feel less like a stage set for one story and more like an unfinished library, filled with volumes we have not opened. And perhaps that is why these distant worlds hold such power over us. Each one is a reminder that reality is larger than our inheritance, and that the search for others begins by accepting how much we have yet to imagine. What if the universe does not hide its mysteries in grand spectacles, but in brief flashes so powerful they seem to arrive from another order of reality? In recent decades, astronomers have encountered one of the strangest phenomena in modern science: fast radio bursts. These are sudden eruptions of radio energy, lasting only milliseconds, yet carrying astonishing force. For an instant, they can outshine entire galaxies in the radio spectrum before vanishing again. No warning, no lingering trail, just a pulse, sharp as a struck bell in a cathedral the size of the cosmos. At first, the mystery felt almost mythic. A signal this intense, this brief, this difficult to trace, seemed to invite every kind of interpretation. Some imagined advanced technology, deliberate beacons crossing intergalactic dark. Others urged restraint, pointing to magnetars, collapsing stellar remnants, and violent astrophysical environments capable of producing extraordinary energy. Over time, evidence began to favor natural explanations, especially highly magnetized neutron stars, whose internal stresses may unleash sudden bursts into space. But the story did not become less fascinating as it became less exotic. It became deeper, because fast radio bursts reveal a universe that is not still, not silent, and not entirely legible at first glance. Some repeat, others do not. Some emerge from ancient, distant galaxies. A few have been localized with enough precision to connect them to real environments, real histories, real cosmic neighborhoods. Each detection is both a measurement and a pursuit, a chance to understand not just the burst itself, but the invisible material it passed through on its way to us. In that sense, these flashes are not only mysteries, they are tools illuminating the faint structure of the universe between galaxies. And yet the emotional force remains. There is something almost intimate about a phenomenon that exists for only a fraction of a second and still alters the way we see the whole. Perhaps that is why fast radio bursts feel so haunting. They resemble certain human experiences, sudden, overwhelming, and gone before we can fully name them. Maybe the lesson is not that the universe is trying to get our attention. Maybe it is that reality is always speaking in forms that exceed our first understanding. Our task is not to rush toward fantasy, but to become patient enough to hear what the data is actually saying. What if the true mystery is not a voice from space, but an absence so profound it begins to feel like an answer. This question has haunted modern thought with unusual persistence. If the universe is ancient, if stars are plentiful, if planets are common, and if time has given life countless opportunities to rise elsewhere, then why does the sky remain so quiet? This tension is often called the Fermi paradox, though it is less a paradox than a wound in our expectations. On paper, the cosmos seems fertile. In experience, it feels mute. Many answers have been proposed, each one revealing as much about us as about the stars. Perhaps intelligent life is extraordinarily rare, a fragile event balanced on too many unlikely conditions. Perhaps simple organisms emerge often, but complex minds seldom endure. Civilizations may destroy themselves, exhaust their worlds, lose interest in expansion, or retreat into forms of existence we would not recognize. Some thinkers imagine that the galaxy may be full of life, but separated by distances, timescales, and methods so vast that contact becomes nearly impossible. Others suggest a darker possibility, that silence is not emptiness, but caution. Yet even these theories carry a distinctly human shadow. We frame the unknown through our own history of ambition, violence, loneliness, and longing. We imagine empires because we have built them. We imagine collapse because we know our own weaknesses. We imagine listening civilizations because we, too, are listening. The Fermi paradox is not just a scientific puzzle. It is a mirror held up to the species asking the question. And still, the silence does not necessarily diminish the universe. In a strange way, it enlarges it. It reminds us that knowledge is not owed to us on our preferred timetable. We may live in a cosmos crowded with life and still stand beyond its reach. Or we may be early, one of the first flickers in a dark field not yet fully lit. That possibility is both humbling and unsettling. Because if the universe has not answered, then our responsibility grows heavier. We are not merely waiting for meaning to arrive from elsewhere. We may be among the beings required to create it, to preserve it, and to carry it forward before the silence closes in again. What if the evidence we seek is not a message meant for us, but a ruin drifting through time with no intention of being found? Human beings often imagine first contact as a moment of exchange, a signal answered, a greeting returned, a mutual recognition across distance. But the universe may not work that way. If intelligence rises and falls over millions of years, then the galaxy may be less like a crowded conversation and more like an archaeological landscape. Not voices, but remnants. Not visitors, but traces. A broken artifact can reveal a civilization long after its makers are gone. This possibility has quietly shaped some of the most thoughtful scientific discussions about extraterrestrial life. Researchers have considered whether probes, beacons, or engineered structures might outlast the societies that created them. A machine built to endure could cross distances that living beings cannot. A relic might continue moving through interstellar space after its purpose has been forgotten even by its origin world. In that light, certain anomalies take on a different texture. They are not evidence of active intent, but of deep time, technology transformed into cosmic debris. There is something haunting about that idea. We are used to treating tools as extensions of life, objects animated by the wishes of their users. But over long enough periods, the relationship reverses. Civilizations disappear. Artifacts remain. A fragment of design becomes detached from memory, drifting farther than history. And when another species encounters it, the object may seem almost alive simply because its context has been erased. This is one reason some space mysteries feel so emotionally charged. We do not merely wonder whether they are natural or artificial. We sense, beneath the question, a more intimate fear that intelligence itself may be temporary, and that what lasts are the things it leaves behind without explanation. A signal can fade, a culture can vanish, but a structure, a probe, a shard of engineered matter might travel on, carrying no message except its own improbable existence. And perhaps that is the most sobering version of discovery. Not finding neighbors ready to speak, but evidence that someone, somewhere, once reached outward as we do now. If so, then every object crossing the dark becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes a meditation on time, survival, and the fragile hope that something of us might endure long after our own voices are gone. What if the deepest mystery is not whether the universe contains intelligence, but whether intelligence can survive its own brilliance long enough to be seen? Every search for life beyond Earth carries a hidden comparison. We look outward, but we cannot help measuring what we find against ourselves. Our telescopes scan distant atmospheres for traces of chemistry that might suggest biology. Our radio dishes search for patterns that seem too orderly to be accidental. Our theories imagine civilizations rising on other worlds, building tools, harnessing energy, perhaps even reshaping their environments. Yet beneath all of it lies a quieter and more difficult question. What becomes of a species once it acquires the power to transform its world? This is where astronomy crosses into reflection. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is often described as a technical project, but it is also a study in destiny. Any civilization detectable across interstellar space would need to master energy, communication, and long-term stability on scales we ourselves have barely begun to grasp. It would need not only knowledge, but endurance, not merely invention, but restraint. To imagine such a society is to confront the fragility of our own. That is partly why the silence feels so charged. It may indicate rarity, distance, or the limitations of our methods. But it may also suggest how hard it is for intelligence to remain luminous without destroying the conditions that made it possible. A civilization may become powerful enough to announce itself long before it becomes wise enough to persist. In that sense, the sky's silence is not only a cosmic puzzle, it is a warning written in absence. And still, there is hope in the search. Because to ask where everyone is also means asking what kind of future would allow us to become the kind of presence another world might one day detect. Not louder, necessarily. Not more dominant, but more durable, more thoughtful, more capable of carrying knowledge without letting knowledge consume us. Perhaps that is the hidden gift of these mysteries. They return us, again and again, to the unfinished work of being human. They remind us that the question of life in the universe is never only about others. It is also about what we choose to become while the stars remain silent. What if the most powerful discoveries are the ones that force us to admit how little we truly know about the ordinary world just beyond our doorstep? For all our fascination with distant stars, some of space's most enduring mysteries have come from much closer to home. Mars, with its dry riverbeds and polar ice, once seemed almost eager to tell a story of lost habitability. Europa, beneath its shell of fractured ice, hints at a buried ocean moving in darkness. Enceladus sends plumes into space like breath escaping a frozen lung, carrying salts and organic compounds from an unseen interior. These are not cinematic fantasies. They are real worlds, measurable and near, and they have changed the emotional geography of the solar system. There was a time when life beyond Earth belonged mainly to imagination. Now, the question feels less like fiction and more like unfinished fieldwork. No confirmed alien organism has been found. No fossil handprint waits beneath Martian dust. No signal rises from the seas below Europa's crust. And yet the conditions that once seemed impossibly rare now appear in forms both subtle and persistent. Water, chemistry, energy gradients, hidden reservoirs of warmth. The ingredients gather in unexpected places, as if the universe has been quietly experimenting all along. That shift matters because it reframes mystery itself. We do not have to leap immediately to advanced civilizations or impossible technologies to feel wonder. A single microbial ecosystem beneath alien ice would alter the meaning of life in the cosmos. It would tell us that biology is not a solitary accident, but a recurring expression of matter under the right conditions. Even the possibility of that truth has made nearby moons and planets feel less like scenery and more like unopened chapters. And perhaps that is the humbling lesson of our own solar system. Before we imagine great cities around distant suns, we may first need to understand the quiet potential hidden in the cold worlds already circling our own star. The unknown may not always arrive from far away. Sometimes it waits close by, patient and buried, asking whether we are mature enough to recognize wonder even when it comes in microscopic form. What if the universe leaves its deepest impressions not in proof, but in the long emotional afterglow of uncertainty? By the time we reach the far edge of these mysteries, something subtle has changed. The question is no longer just whether a signal was artificial, whether a dimming star concealed vast structures, or whether an interstellar object carried the shape of intention. The larger question is what repeated encounters with uncertainty do to a civilization that has learned to observe so much and yet still understands so little. We have become remarkably skilled at measuring the cosmos. But measurement alone does not quiet longing. There is a human pattern in all of this. We look into ambiguity and instinctively begin composing meaning, not because we are irrational, but because consciousness itself is a meaning-making force. A strange pulse in the radio spectrum. A world with the chemistry of promise. A silence that stretches across centuries of searching. Each becomes more than data. It becomes a site where science and imagination meet, sometimes uneasily, sometimes beautifully. The discipline of discovery lies in keeping both alive without letting either take over. This is why the history of cosmic mystery feels so intimate. It is not only about stars and instruments, it is about how we live with unanswered questions. Some people need certainty and reach too quickly for dramatic explanations. Others fear error so much they dismiss wonder before it can breathe. The wiser path is narrower and harder, to remain open without becoming credulous, to stay skeptical without becoming numb. That balance is not only good science, it is a mature way of being human. And maybe that is the quiet revelation hidden beneath all these unresolved phenomena. The universe does not owe us immediate clarity. It asks for patience, revision, humility. It teaches us that not every unanswered question is a failure. Some are invitations, ways of enlarging the mind, deepening the spirit, and reminding us that reality is often richer than the stories we first tell about it. So the mystery remains. But perhaps that is not a deficit. Perhaps it is the atmosphere in which wisdom begins, like starlight traveling across darkness, arriving incomplete, and yet enough to guide us onward. What if, after all our searching, the greatest discovery is not another civilization, but a new understanding of our own place within the unfinished story of the universe. There is a quiet shift that happens when a mystery lasts long enough. It stops feeling like a problem to be solved and begins to feel like a landscape through which we travel. The unexplained objects, the vanished signals, the planets suspended in possibility, the buried oceans, the stars that dim for reasons not yet fully known, all of them gradually form something larger than a catalogue of anomalies. They become a portrait of a species learning how to stand in uncertainty without turning away. That may be the most meaningful thread connecting every chapter of this journey. We began with the hope that the cosmos might reveal a dramatic secret, some unmistakable sign that intelligence has already crossed the dark before us. But along the way, the search exposed something just as profound. It showed us the discipline required to face mystery honestly. It showed us how easily desire can color interpretation, and how necessary humility becomes when the evidence remains incomplete. Above all, it revealed that wonder is strongest when it is tempered by care. In that sense, every unanswered question in space science performs two functions at once. It points outward, toward realities still hidden from view, and it points inward, toward the habits of mind and heart we must cultivate if we hope to meet those realities wisely. Curiosity alone is not enough. Neither is skepticism. We need a steadier combination. Imagination, guided by method, hope, restrained by evidence, or anchored in patience. Perhaps that is what maturity looks like for a civilization. Not losing its appetite for marvels, but learning how to carry that appetite without being consumed by it. To remain open to astonishing possibilities while accepting that truth often arrives slowly, in fragments, through years of revision and doubt. And so we stand in a universe still largely unread, surrounded by questions that have not finished unfolding. Maybe one day the silence will break. Maybe it already has in ways too subtle for us yet to understand. Until then, the search itself becomes a kind of answer, proof that consciousness, however fragile, is capable of meeting the unknown with both intelligence and grace. In the end, the universe does not resolve itself into a single answer. It remains what it has always been: immense, unfinished, and strangely intimate to those who spend their lives trying to read it. We began with mysteries that seemed to point outward: a brief signal, a dimming star, an object crossing interstellar dark, flashes too sudden to understand, worlds that hinted at hidden life. But as the journey continued, those mysteries began to point back toward us, not because they were illusions, but because every encounter with the unknown became, in part, an encounter with our own limits. That may be the quiet truth beneath all cosmic searching. We do not look into space as blank observers. We carry memory, fear, ambition, and longing with us. We project patterns onto the dark, then learn, painfully and beautifully, how to correct ourselves. We imagine we are searching for others, but we are also studying what kind of minds we are, what we trust too quickly, what we dismiss too early, what we hope the silence might contain. In that sense, the search for alien life, strange signals, and forgotten possibilities is not a detour from the human story. It is one of its purest expressions. And still, wonder survives. Perhaps because uncertainty has not emptied the universe of meaning. It has deepened it. A cosmos that refuses easy answers becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a companion in thought, a vast and patient reminder that truth is often approached rather than seized. The stars do not flatter us with clarity. They ask something more demanding: humility, endurance, and the courage to remain curious even when certainty does not come. So we are left, not with closure, but with a steadier kind of wisdom. That mystery is not the enemy of knowledge. It is the condition that makes knowledge worth pursuing. That memory, however fragile, can still carry wonder across generations, and that the future of our species may depend less on whether someone else is out there than on whether we can meet the unknown within the universe and within ourselves with enough patience to keep listening. Perhaps that is the final inheritance of the night sky. Not proof, not possession, but perspective. A reminder that we are small, yes, but also capable of asking large questions with care. And maybe for now, that is answer enough.